Some piano. We need some piano, right? We cannot have not have a piano. Little bit of piano, a little bit of creaking. Need a bit of creaking. A little bit of water. We can do our beauty. Where were we? Chapter 57. The night was sultry. Ooh. And Kitty sat at the window looking at the fantastic roofs, dark against the starlight of the Chinese temple. When at last Walter came in, her eyes were heavy with weeping, but she was composed. Notwithstanding all there was to harass her, she felt, perhaps only from exhaustion, strangely at peace. "I thought you'd already be in bed," said Walter as he came in. "I wasn't sleepy. I thought it's cooler to sit up. Have you had any dinner?" "All I want." He walked up and down the long room, and she saw that he had something to say to her. She knew that he was embarrassed. Without concern, she waited for him to summon up his resolution. He began abruptly. "I've been thinking about what you told me this afternoon. It seems to me that it would be better if you went away. I've spoken to Colonel Yu, and he will give you an escort. You could take the Amach with you. You will be quite safe." "Where is there for me to go?" "You can go with your mother's." "Don't you think she would be pleased to see me?" "Do you think she would be pleased to see me?" He paused for a moment, hesitating as though for reflection. "Then you can go to Qingyan." "What should I do there?" "You will need a great deal of care and attention. I don't think it's fair to ask you to stay here." She could not prevent a smile, not only of bitterness, but of frank amusement, that crossed her face. She gave him a glance and very nearly laughed. I don't know why you should be so anxious about my health. He came over to the window and stood looking out at the night. There had been so many stars in the unclouded sky. This isn't the place for a woman in your condition. She looked at him, white in his thin clothes against the darkness. There was something sinister in his fine profile, and yet oddly enough at this moment it excited her no fear. When you insisted on me coming here, did you want it to kill me? She asked suddenly. He was so long answering that she thought he had refused to hear. At first, she gave a little shudder, for it was the first time he had admitted his intention, but she bore him no ill will for it. Her feeling surprised herself. There was a certain admiration in it and a faint amusement. She did not quite know why, but suddenly thinking of Charlie Townsend, he seemed to her an abject fool. It was a terrible risk you were taking, she answered. With your sensitive consciousness, I wonder if you could have ever forgiven yourself if I did die. Well, you haven't. You've thrived on it. I've never felt better in my life. She had an instinct to throw herself on the mercy of his humor. After all they had gone through, when they were living amidst these scenes of horror and desolation, it seemed inept to attach importance to the ridiculous act of fornication. When death stood around the corner, taking lives like a gardener digging up potatoes, it was foolishness to care what dirty things this person or that did with his body. If she could only make him realize how little Charlie meant to her, so that now already she had difficulty in calling up his features to her imagination, and how entirely the love of him had passed out of her heart. Because she had no feeling for Townsend, the various acts she had committed with him had lost their significance. She had regained her heart, and what she had given of her body seemed not to matter a rap. She was inclined to say to Walter, "Look here, don't you think we've been silly long enough? We've sulked with one another like children. Why can't we kiss and be friends? There is no reason why we shouldn't be friends just because we're not lovers." He stood still at the lamplight made the parlor of his impassive face startling. She did not trust him. If she said the wrong thing, he would turn upon her with such an icy sternness. She knew by now his extreme sensitiveness, for which his acid irony was a protection, and how quickly he could close his heart if his feelings were hurt. She had a moment's irritation at his stupidity. Surely what troubled him most was the wound to his vanity. She vaguely realized that this is the hardest of all wounds to heal. It was singular that men attracted so much importance to their wives' faithfulness. When first she had gone with Charlie, she had expected to feel quite different, a changed woman. But she had seemed to herself exactly the same. She had experienced only the well-being and a greater vitality. She wished now that she had been able to tell Walter that the child was his. The lie would have meant so little to her, and the insurance would have been so great a comfort to him. After all, it might not be a lie. It was funny that something in her heart which had prevented her from giving herself the benefit of the doubt. How silly men were! Their part in procreation was so unimportant. It was the woman who carried the child through long months of uneasiness and bore it with pain, and yet a man, because of his momentary connection, made such a preposterous claim. Why should that make any difference to him in feelings towards the child? When Kitty's thoughts wandered to the child which she herself would bear, she thought of it not with emotion nor with a passion of maternity, but with an idle curiosity. "I dare say you wouldn't like to think it over a little," said Walter, breaking the long silence. "Think of what?" He turned a little as if he were surprised. "About when you want to go." "But I don't want to go." "Why not?" "I like my work at the convent. I think I'm making myself useful. I should prefer to stay as long as you do. I think I should tell you that in your present condition you are probably more liable to catch any infection that happens to be about." "I like the discreet way you put it," she smiled ironically. "You're not staying for my sake." She hesitated. He little knew that now the strongest emotion he excited in her, and the most unexpected, was pity. "No, I do not love you. I often think I rather bore you. I shouldn't have thought you were the sort of person to put yourself out for a few stuffy nuns and a parcel of Chinese brats." Her lips outlined a smile. "I think it's rather unfair to despise me so much because you made such a mistake in your judgment of me. It's not my fault that you were such an ass. If you've determined to stay, you are of course at liberty to do so. I'm sorry I cannot give you the opportunity of being magnanimous." She found it strangely hard to be quite serious with him. "As a matter of fact, you are quite right. It's not only for the orphans that I am staying, you see. I'm in the peculiar position that I haven't got a soul in the world that I can go to. I know no one wouldn't think me. I don't know anyone who wouldn't think me a nuisance. I know no one who cares a row of pins if I'm alive or dead." He frowned, but he did not frown in anger. "We have made a dreadful hash of things, haven't we?" he said. "Do you still want to divorce me?" "I don't think I care any more. You must know that my bringing you here, I've condoned the offense. I don't know. You see, I haven't made a study of infidelity. What are we going to do when we leave here? Are we going to continue living together? Oh, don't you think we can let the future take care of itself?" There was the weariness of death in his voice. Ooh, ominous. 58. 2 or 3 days later, Waddington fetched Kitty from the convent, for her restlessness had induced her immediately to resume her work, and took her to drink the promised cup of tea with his mistress. Kitty had on more than one occasion dined at Waddington's house. It was square, white, and pretentious building, such as the customs build for their officials all over China, and the dining room in which they ate, the drawing room in which they sat, were furnished with prim and solid furniture. They had the appearance of being partly offices and partly hotel. There was nothing homelike in them, and you understood that these houses were merely places of haphazard sojourn to their successive occupants. It would never have occurred to you that on a proper floor mystery and perhaps romance dwelled shuddered. They ascended a flight of stairs, and Waddington opened a door. Kitty went into a large bare room with whitewashed walls, on which hung scrolls in various calligraphies. At a square table on a stiff armchair, both the backwood and heavily carved, sat the Manchu. She rose as Kitty and Waddington entered, but made no step forward. "Here she is," said Waddington, and added something in Chinese. Kitty shook her hands. She was slim in her long embroidered gown and somewhat taller than Kitty. Used to the southern people had expected. She wore a jacket of pale green silk with tight sleeves that came over her wrists, and her black hair, elaborately dressed, was the headdress of the Manchu women. Her face was coated with powder, and her cheeks, from the eyes to the mouth, heavily rouged. Her puckered eyebrows were a thin dark line, and her mouth was scarlet. From this mask her black, slightly slanting, large eyes burned like leaks of liquid jet. Okay, Baccaroni. Liquid jet. She seemed more like an idol than a woman. Her movements were slow and assured. Kitty had the impression that she was slightly shy, but very curious. She nodded her head 2 or 3 times, looking at Kitty, while Waddington spoke of her. Kitty noticed her hands. They were preternaturally long, very slender, of the color of ivory, and the exquisite nails were painted. Kitty thought she had never seen anything so lovely as those languid and elegant hands. They suggested the breeding of uncounted centuries. She spoke a little in a high voice, like the twittering of birds in an orchard, and Waddington, translating, told Kitty that she was glad to see her. How old was she, and how many children had she got? They sat down on the straight stairs of the square table, and a boy brought in bowls of tea, pale and scented with jasmine. The Manchu lady handed Kitty a green tea tin of Free Castle's cigarettes. Besides the table and the chairs, the room contained little furniture. There was a wide pallet bed on which was embroidered headrest and 2 sandalwood chests. "What does she do with herself all day long?" asked Kitty. "She paints a little, and sometimes she writes a poem, but she mostly sits. She smokes, but only in moderation, which is fortunate, since one of my duties is to prevent the traffic of opium." "Do you smoke?" asked Kitty. "Seldom. To tell you the truth, I much prefer whiskey." There was in the room a faint acrid smell. It was not unpleasant, but peculiar and exotic. "Tell her that I am sorry I cannot talk to her. I am sure we have many things to say to one another." When this was translated to the Manchu, she gave Kitty a quick glance in which there was a hint of a smile. She was impressive as she sat, without embarrassment, in her beautiful clothes, and from the painted face the eyes looked out weary, self-possessed, and unfathomable. 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 Which was unreal, like a picture, and yet had a elegance which made Kitty feel all thumbs. Kitty had never paid anything but passing and somewhat contemptuous attention to the China in which fate had thrown her. It was not done her set. Now she seemed on a sudden to have a little inkling of something remote and mysterious. Here was the East, immemorial, dark, and inscrutable. The beliefs and the ideals of the West seemed crude, besides ideals and beliefs of which, in this exquisite creature, she seemed to catch a fugitive glimpse. Here was a different life, lived on a different plane. Kitty felt strangely that the sight of this idol, with her painted face and slanting, weary eyes, made the efforts and the pains of everyday world she knew slightly absurd. That colored mask seemed to hide the secret of an abundant, profound, and significant experience. Those long, delicate hands, with their tapering fingers, held the keys of riddles undivided. "What does she think about all day long?" asked Kitty. "Nothing," smiled Waddington. "She's wonderful. Tell her I've never seen such beautiful hands. I wonder what she sees in you." Waddington, smiling, translated the question. "She says I am good." "As if a woman ever looked at a man for his virtue," Kitty mocked. The Manchu laughed but once. This was when Kitty, for something to say, expressed admiration of a jade bracelet she wore. She took it off, and Kitty, trying to put it on, found, though her hands were small enough, it would not pass her knuckles. Then the Manchu burst into childlike laughter. She said something to Waddington and called for an amach. She gave an instruction, and the amach in a moment brought in a pair of very beautiful Manchu shoes. "She wants to give you these if you can wear them," said Waddington. "I'll find they make quite good bedroom slippers." "They fit me perfectly," said Kitty, not without satisfaction. She noticed a roguish smile on Waddington's face. "Are they too big for her?" she asked quickly. "Miles." Kitty laughed, and then Waddington translated. The Manchu and the amach laughed also. Then Kitty and Waddington, a little later, were walking up the hill together. She turned to him with a friendly smile. "You did not tell me that you had a great affection for her." "What makes you think I have?" "I seen it in your eyes. It's strange. It must be like loving a phantom or a dream. Men are incalculable. I thought you were like everybody else, but now I feel I don't know the first thing about you." As they reached the bungalow, he asked her abruptly, "Why did you want to see her?" Kitty hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm looking for something, and I don't quite know what it is. But I know it is very important for me to know it. And if I did it, it would make all the difference. Perhaps the nuns know it. When I am with them, I feel that they hold a secret which they will not share with me. I don't know why it came into my head that if I saw this Manchu woman, I should have an inkling of what I am looking for. Perhaps she would tell me if she could. What makes you think she knows?" Kitty gave him a sidelong glance, but did not answer. Instead, she asked him a question. "Do you know it?" He smiled and shrugged his shoulders. "Tao. Some of us look for the way in opium, some in God, some of us in whiskey, and some in love. It's all the same way. It leads no whither." The way of the Tao. Okay. No hither? How do you say that? Let's find out.
No wither.
Yeah, no wither. Okay. No wither. Mean to no place, which is... You'd probably expect it to mean that. Towards no place. Towards nowhere, essentially. It leads nowhere. Okay. Chapterino 59. Kitty fell again into the comfortable routine of her work, and though in the early morning feeling ran from well, she had spirit enough not to let it discompose her. She was astonished at the interest the nuns took in her. Sisters, who when she saw them in the corridor had done no more than bid her good morning, now, on a flimsy pretext, came into the room in which she was occupied and looked at her, chatting a little, with a sweet and childlike excitement. Sister St. Joseph told her with a repetition which was sometimes tedious, how she had been saying to herself for the past days, "Now, I wonder," or "I shouldn't be surprised." And then, when Kitty fainted, "There can be no doubt, it jumps to the eyes." She told Kitty long stories of her sister-in-law's confinements, which, but for Kitty's quick sense of humor, would have not been a little alarming. Yes, we are still watching. Thank you. Sister St. Joseph combined in a pleasant fashion the realistic outlook of her upbringing, a river wound through the meadows of her father's farm, and the poplars that stood on its banks trembled in the faintest breeze, with a charming intimacy with the religious things. One day, firmly convinced that a heretic could know nothing of such matters, she told Kitty of the Annunciation. "I can never read those lines in the Holy Writ without weeping," she said. "I don't know why, but it gives me such a funny feeling." And then in French, in words that Kitty sounded unfamiliar, and in their precision a trifle cold, she quoted, "And the angel came unto her, and said, Hail, full of grace, and the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou amongst women." The mystery of birth blew through the convent like a little fitful wind playing amongst the white blossoms of an orchard. The thought that Kitty was with child disturbed and excited these sterile women. She frightened them a little now and fascinated them. They looked upon the physical side of her condition with robust common sense, for they were the daughters of peasants and fishermen, but in their childlike heart was awe. They were troubled by the thought of her burden, and yet happily and strangely excited. Sister St. Joseph told her that they all prayed for her, and Sister St. Martin, who said what a pity it was that she was not a Catholic. But the Mother Superior had reproved her. She said that it was possible to be a good woman, une brave femme, she put it, even though one was a Protestant, and le bon Dieu would in some way or another arrange all that. Kitty was both touched and diverted by the interest she aroused. but surprised beyond measure when she found that even Mother Superior, so austere in her saintliness, treated her with a new complacence, a new complacence. She had always been kind to Kitty, but in a remote fashion. Now she used her with a tenderness in which there was something maternal. Her voice had in it a new and gentle note, and in her eyes was a sudden playfulness, as though Kitty were a child who had done a clever and amusing thing. It was oddly moving. Her soul was like a calm grey sea rolling majestically, awe-inspiring in its sombre greatness. And then suddenly a ray of sunshine made it alert, friendly, and gay. Often now, in the evening, she would come and sit with Kitty. "I must take care that you do not tire yourself, mon enfant," she said, making a transparent excuse to herself, "or Dr. Fame will never forgive me. Oh, this British self-control. There he is, delighted beyond measure, and when you speak to him of it, he becomes quite pale." She took Kitty's hand and patted it affectionately. "Dr. Fane told me that he wished you to go away, but you would not, because you could not bear to leave us. That was kind of you, my dear child, and I want you to know that we appreciate the help you have been to us. But I think that you did not want to leave him either, and that is better, for your place is by his side, and he needs you. Ah, I don't know what we should have done without that admirable man. I am glad to think that he has been able to do something for you," said Kitty. "You must love him with all your heart, my dear. He is a saint." Kitty smiled and in her heart sighed. There was only one thing she could do for Walter now, and that she could not think how to. She wanted him to forgive her, not for her sake any more, but for his own, for she felt that that this alone could give him peace of mind. It was useless to ask him for forgiveness, and if he had a suspicion that she desired it for his good rather than hers, his stubborn vanity would make him refuse at all costs. It was curious that his pity now did not irritate her. It seemed natural, and only made her sorrier. Oh, that's how you spell sorrier. Okay, made her sorrier for him. And the only chance was that some unexpected occurrence might throw him off his guard. She had an idea that he would welcome an uprush of emotion, which would liberate him from this nightmare of resentment, but that, in his pathetic jolly, he would fight when it came with all his might against it. Was it not pitiful that men, tarrying so short a space in a world where there was so much pain, should thus torture themselves? Verse 60. Chapterino 60. Though the Mother Superior talked with Kitty no more than 3 or 4 times, and once or twice but 10 minutes, the impression she made upon Kitty was profound. Her character, like a country which on its first acquaintance seems grand but inhospitable, but in which presently you discover smiling little villages among fruit trees in the folds of the majestic mountains, and pleasant abiding rivers that flow kindly through lush meadows. But these comfortable scenes, though they surprise and even reassure you, are not enough to make you feel at home in the land of twainy heights and windswept places. It would have been impossible to become intimate with the Mother Superior. She had that something impersonal about her which Kitty had felt with the other nuns, even with the good-humoured, chatty Sister Joseph. But with her, it was a barrier which was almost palpable. It gave you quite a curious sensation, chilling but awe-inspiring, that she could walk on the same earth as you, attend to mundane affairs, and yet live so obviously upon a plane you could not reach. She once said to Kitty, "It is not enough that the religious should be continually in prayer with Jesus. She should be herself a prayer." Though her conversation was interwoven with her religion, Kitty felt that this was natural to her, and that no effort was made to influence the heretic. It seemed strange to her that the Mother Superior, with her deep sense of charity, should be content to leave Kitty in a condition of what must seem to her sinful ignorance. Ooh. Hey, cat. Hashtag Yurki. Hi, cat. I think I left you streaming. Then you disconnected, I think, and then I think it came back. At least in my PC. Yes, sinful ignorance. One evening the two of them were sitting together. The days were shortening now, and the mellow light of the evening was agreeable and a little melancholy. The Mother Superior looked very tired. Her tragic face was drawn and white. Her dark, fine eyes had lost their fire. Her fatigue, perhaps, urged her to a rare mood of confidence. "This is a memorable day for me, my child," she said, breaking from a long reverie, "for this is the anniversary of the day on which I finally determined to enter religion. For 2 years I had been thinking of it, but I had suffered as if it were a fear of this calling, for I dreaded that I might be recaptured by the spirit of the world. But that morning, when I communicated, I made the vow that I would before nightfall announce my wish to my dear mother. After I had received the Holy Communion, I asked our Lord to give me peace of mind. 'Thou shalt have it,' only the answer seemed to come to me when thou hast ceased to desire it." The Mother Superior seemed to lose herself in the thoughts of the past. That day one of our friends, Madame Viernot, had left for Carmel without telling any of her relatives. She knew that they were opposed to her step, but she was a widow, and though that as such she had the right to do as she chose, only one of my cousins had gone to bid farewell to the dear fugitive, and did not come back till the evening. She was much moved. I had not spoken to my mother. I trembled at the thought of telling her that what I had in mind, and yet I wished to keep the resolution I had made at the Holy Communion. I asked my cousin all the matter of questions. My mother, who appeared to be absorbed in her tapestry, lost no word. While I talked, I said to myself, "If I want to speak today, I have not a minute to lose." It is strange how vividly I remember the scene. We were sitting around a round table covered with red cloth, and we worked by the light of a lamp which was a green shade. My two cousins were staying with us, and we were all working at tapestries to recover the chairs in the drawing room. I imagine they had not been recovered since the days of Louis XIV, when they were brought, and they were so shabby and faded. My mother said it was a disgrace. I tried to form the words, but the lips would not move. And then, suddenly, after a few minutes of silence, my mother said to me, "I really cannot understand the conduct of our friend. I do not like this leaving without a word all those to whom she is dear. The gesture is theatrical and offends my taste. A well-bred woman does nothing which shall make people talk of her. I hope that if ever you caused us the great sorrow of leaving us, you would not take flight as though you were committing a crime." It was the moment to speak, but such was my weakness that I could only say, "Ah, set your mind at rest, maman. I shall not have the strength." My mother made no answer, and I repented because I had not dared to explain myself. I seemed to hear the words of our Lord to Saint Peter, "Peter, lovest thou me?" Oh, what weakness, what ingratitude was mine! I loved my comfort, the matter of my life, my family, my diversions. I was lost in these bitter thoughts when a little later, as though the conversation had not been interrupted, my mother said to me, "Still, my Odette, I do not think that you will die without having done something that will endure." I was still lost in my anxiety and my reflections, while my cousins, never knowing the beating of my heart, worked quietly. Then suddenly my mother, letting her tapestry fall, and looking at me attentively, said, "Ah, my dear child, I am very sure that you will end by becoming a religious." "Are you speaking seriously, my good mother?" I answered. You are laying bare the inmost thoughts and desire of my heart." "Mais oui," cried my cousin, without giving me time to finish. "For 2 years Odette has thought of nothing else. But you will not give your permission, ma tante. You must not give your permission." "By what right, my dear child, should we refuse it?" said my mother. "If it is the will of God." My cousins then, wishing to make a jest of the conversation, asked me what I intended to do with the trifles that belonged to me, and quarrelled gaily about which should take possession of this and which of that. But these first moments of gaiety lasted very little, while we began to weep. Then we heard my father come upstairs. The Mother Superior paused for a moment and sighed. It was very hard for my father. I was his only daughter, and men often have a deeper feeling for their daughters when they have had their sons than they have ever had for their sons. "It is a great misfortune to have a heart," said Kitty, with a smile. "It is a great fortune to consecrate that heart to the love of Jesus Christ." At that moment, a little girl came to the Mother Superior, and, confident in her interest, showed her a fantastic toy that she somehow got a hold of. The Mother Superior put her beautiful, delicate hands around the child's shoulder, and the child nested up to her. It intrigued Kitty to observe how sweet her smile was, and how yet so impersonal. "It is wonderful to see the adoration that your orphans have for you, mother," she said. "I think I should have been very proud if I could excite so great a devotion." Mother Superior gave once more her aloof and yet beautiful smile. There is only one way to win hearts, and that is to make oneself like unto those of whom one would be loved. I think that meant lurky. Derp. There's a small L. Derp. Lurky, lurky. Walter did not come back to dinner that evening. Kitty waited for him a little, for when she had detained in the city, he always managed to send her word, but at last she sat down. She made no more than a pretense of eating the many courses which the Chinese cook. With his regard for property notwithstanding pestilence and the difficulty of provisioning, he invariably set before her, and then sinking into the long rattan chair with the open window, surrounded herself to the beauty of the starry night. The silence arrested her. She did not try to read. Her thoughts floated upon the surface of her mind like little white clouds reflected on a still lake. She was too tired to seize upon one, follow it up, and absorb herself in its attentive train. She wondered vaguely what there was for her in the various impressions which her conversations with the nuns had left upon her. It was singular that though their way of life had so profoundly moved her, the faith which occasioned it left her untouched. She could not envisage the possibility that she might at any time be captured by the ardor of belief. She gave a little sigh. Perhaps it would make everything easier if that great white light should illuminate her soul. Once or twice she had had the desire to tell the Mother Superior of her unhappiness and its cause, but she dared not. She could not bear that austere woman should think ill of her. To her, what she had done would naturally seem a grievous sin. The odd thing was that she herself could not regard it as wicked so much as stupid and ugly. Perhaps it was due to the obtuseness in her that she looked upon the connection with Townsend as a regrettable and shocking event, even shocking, but to the forgotten rather than to be repented of. It was like making a blunder at a party. There was nothing to do about it. It was dreadfully mortifying, but it showed a lack of sense to ascribe such importance to it. A little shag there, a little shag the other way, it doesn't matter that much. A little boinky boinky. She shuddered as though she thought of Charlie, with his large frame too well covered, the vagueness of his jaw, and the way he had of standing, with his chest thrown out so that he might not seem to have a paunch. His sanguine temperament showed itself in the little red veins which soon would form a network on his rowdy cheeks. She had liked his bushy eyebrows. There was to her in them now something animal and repulsive. In the future, it was curious how indifferent it felt. It left her. She could not see it in it at all. Perhaps she would die when her baby was born. Her sister Doris had always been much stronger than she, and Doris had nearly died. She had done with her duty and produced her heir to the baronetcy. Kitty smiled as she thought of her mother's satisfaction. If the future was so vague, it meant perhaps that she was destined never to see it. Walter would probably ask her mother to take care of the child if the child survived, and she knew him well enough to be sure that, however uncertain of his paternity, he would treat it with kindness. Walter could be trusted under any circumstances to behave admirably. It was a pity that with his great qualities, his unselfishness and honor, his intelligence and sensibility, he should be so unlovable. She was not in the least frightened of him now, but sorry for him, and at the same time she could not help thinking him slightly absurd. The depth of his emotion made him vulnerable, and she had a feeling that somehow and that sometime she could work upon it to induce him to forgive her. The thought haunted her now that in thus giving him peace of mind, she would make the only possible amendments to the anguish she had caused him. It was a pity he had so little sense of humor. She could see them both, some day, laughing together at the way they had tormented themselves. She was tired. She took the lamp into her room and undressed. She went to the bed and presently fell asleep. 62. But, this is how you start a chapter, with but. But she was awakened by a loud knocking. At first, since it was interwoven with the dream from which she was aroused, she could not attach the sound to reality. The knocking went on, and she was conscious that it must be at the gateway of the compound. It was quite dark. She had a watch with a phosphorized hands, and saw that it was 2:30. It must be Walter coming back. How late was he? And he could not wake the boy. The knocking went on, louder and louder, and in the silence of the night it was really not a little alarming. The knocking stopped, and she heard the withdrawing of the heavy bolt. Walter had never come back so late. Poor thing, he must be tired out. She hoped he would have the sense to go straight to bed instead of working as usual in that laboratory of his. There was the sound of voices, the people coming into the compound. That was strange, for Walter, coming home late in order not to disturb her, took pains to be quiet. 2 or 3 persons ran swiftly to the wooden steps and came into the room next door. Kitty was a little frightened. At the back of her mind was always the fear of an anti-foreign riot. Had something happened? Her heart began to beat quickly, but before she had time to put her vague apprehensions into shape, someone walked across the room and knocked at her door. Mrs. Vane? She recognized Waldington's voice. Yes? What is it? Will you get up at once? I have something to say to you. She rose and put on a dressing gown. She unlocked the door and opened it. Her glance took in Waddington in a pair of Chinese trousers and a pongee coat, the houseboy holding a hurricane lamp, and a little further back 3 Chinese soldiers in a khaki. She started as she saw the consternation on Waddington's face. His head was tossed as though he had just jumped out of bed. What is the matter? She gasped. You must keep calm. There is no moment to lose. Put your clothes on at once and come with me. But what is it? Has something happened in the city? The sight of soldiers suggested to her at once that there had been an outbreak, and they would come to protect her. Your husband has been taken ill. We want you to come at once. Walter, she cried. You mustn't be upset. I don't know exactly how. I don't exactly know what's the matter. Colonel Yu sent his officer to me and asked me to bring you to Yamen at once. Kitty started at him for a moment. She felt a sudden cold in her heart, and then she turned. I shall be ready in 2 minutes. I came just as I was, he answered. I was asleep. I just put on a coat and some shoes. She did not hear what he said. She dressed by the light of the stars, taking the first things she came to hand. Her fingers on a sudden were so clumsy that it seemed to take her an age to find the little clasps that closed her dress. She put round her shoulders the Cantonese shawl she had worn in the evening. I haven't put a hat on. There is no need, is there? No. The boy held the lantern in front of them, and they hurried down the steps and out of the compound gate. Take care you don't fall, said Waddington. You'd better hang on to my arm. The soldiers followed immediately behind them. Colonel Yu had sent chairs. They are waiting on the other side of the river. They walked quickly down the hill. Kitty could not bring herself to utter the question which trembled so horribly on her lips. She was mortally afraid of the answer. They came to the bank, and there, with a thread of light at the bow, a sampan was waiting for them. "Is it cholera?" she said then. "I'm afraid so." She gave a little cry and stopped short. "I think you ought to come as quickly as you can." He gave her his hand to help her into the boat. The passage was short and the river almost stagnant. They stood in a bunch at the bow, while a woman with a child tried on her hip with one oar impaled the sampan across. "He has taken ill this afternoon. The afternoon of yesterday, that is," said Waddington. "Why wasn't I sent for at once?" Fishy, fishy. Though there was no reason for it, they spoke in whispers. In the darkness, Kitty could only feel how intense was her companion's anxiety. Colonel Yu wanted to, but he wouldn't let him. Colonel Yu has been with him all the time. He ought to have sent for me all the same. It's heartless. Your husband knew that you had never seen anyone with cholera. It's a terrible and revolting sight. He didn't want you to see it. After all, he is my husband, she said, in a choking voice. Waddington made no reply. Why am I allowed to come now? Waddington put his hand on her arm. My dear, you must be very brave. You must be prepared for the worst. She gave a wail of anguish and turned away a little, for she saw that the 3 Chinese soldiers were looking at her. She had a strange glimpse of the whites of their eyes. Is he dying? I only know the message you gave to his officer, who came and fetched me. As far as I can judge, collapse has set in. Is there no hope at all? I'm dreadfully sorry. I'm afraid that if we don't get there quickly, we shan't find him alive. She shuddered. The tears began to stream down her cheeks. You see, he has been overworking. He has no powers of resistance. She withdrew from the pressure of his arm with a gesture of irritation. It exasperated her that he should talk in that low, anguished voice. They reached the side, and the 2 men, Chinese coolies, standing on the banks, helped her to step on shore. The chairs were waiting, and she got in her into hers. Waddington said to her, "Try and keep tight hold of your nerves. You will want all your self-control. Tell the bearers to make haste. They have orders to go as fast as they can." The officer, already in his chair, passed by and, as he passed, called out to Kitty's bearers. They raised the chair smartly, arranged the poles on their shoulders, and a swift pace set off. Waddington followed close behind. They took the hill at a run, a man with a lantern going before each chair, and at the water's gate the gatehouse keeper was standing with a torch. The officer shouted to him as they approached, and he opened one side of the gate to let them through. He uttered some interjection as they passed, and the bearers called back. In the dead of night, those guttural sounds in a strange language were mysterious and alarming. They slithered up the wet and slippery cobes of the alley, and one of the officer-bearers stumbled. Kitty heard the officers' voices raised in anger, the shrill retort of the bearer, and then the chair in front hurried on again. The streets were narrow and tortuous. Here in the city was deep night. It was a city of the dead. They hastened along a narrow lane, turned a corner, and then at a run took a flight of steps. The bearers were beginning to blow hard. They walked with long, rapid strides, in silence. One took out a ragged handkerchief and as he walked, wiped from his forehead the sweat that ran down his eyes. They wound this way and that, so that it might have been a maze through which they spread. In the shadow of the shuttered shops, sometimes a form seemed to be lying, but you did not know whether it was a man who slept to awake at dawn, or a man who slept to awake never. The narrow streets were ghostly in their silent emptiness. And then, on a sudden, a dog barked loudly. It sent a shock of terror through Kitty's tortured nerves. She did not know where they went. The way seemed endless. Could they not go faster? Faster, faster! The time was going, and any moment it might be too late. I suppose the next time we should have to see if they were too late. Is the end of the chapter, is what I mean. And I think not. I don't think they're going to be too late. They have to have like that scene where they, I don't know, she falls in love with him while he's dying and he forgives her or something. The deathbed scene. Can't pass up on that. Come on. No author could pass on that. Okay. Nethereads. Ooh, a helicopter. Easiest way to get around. Get a helicopter. It even seemed like a commercial. I don't know, I'll take a break. As the little boat comes by, maybe we'll come back with a game. Maybe we'll end stream. Who knows? Bye-bye.